Welcome into the I-80 Boys College Football Show. I'm Christian Hunt. That guy down there is Chris Vaca. We've got a little Georgia versus Ole Miss, the preview video on tap for you today. Chris, I'll jump right into it here. I'll talk about the Georgia Bulldogs. Chris, coming into this game, Georgia's ranked number 2 in the country. Ole Miss is number 16. Georgia sitting at 7-1, 5-1 in conference play. Ole Miss 7-2, 3-2 in conference play. Obviously, you look right here, you see the matchup predictor. Georgia's favored to win this game, not only just by, I would say, the general public, for whatever reason, because it's at home, I guess, for Ole Miss. They're getting 54% of the votes here. So very interesting in a gotta-have-it game, really, for Ole Miss. And I know Chris is going to talk about them. Here's what I want to start off by saying. Georgia has struggled this year, to me, at times on both sides of the ball. You know, you go back to the Alabama game, and I think they got lit up in that one. You look at, I think even Mississippi State lit them up for a little bit there. They look great against Texas, I would say. And then the Florida game happened this last week. You know, and here's the thing I want to touch on, just generally overarching it. The offense has been, I would say the offense has not played a full game all season long. And up until about, I don't know, less than 3-4 minutes in that game, really, they didn't really do a whole lot against Florida either. Carson Beck has turned the ball over 3 times in that game. He's already got 11 interceptions. Last year, he only threw 6 interceptions. He's going to double his interceptions from last year alone going into this year. I think the running backs have been really banged up. Part of the issue to me, Chris, it starts with the running game and Georgia's inability to run the football. It currently ranked 96 in rushing offense right now. You know, a lot of that has to do with injuries, you know, both at the running back and offensive line positions. I feel like they're just not as physical, they're not as dominant as they've been in years past. I feel like Bobo has just been really predictable at times, you know, calling offenses or not trying to use Carson Beck to the best of his ability. The overarching thing I can tell you is whatever excuse you want to throw in there, Carson Beck not only does not look like a Heisman contending winning quarterback like they said all preseason, he doesn't look like a first round draft pick to me right now either. He's regressed and he has gotten worse. And you know, for whatever reason, you can blame, you know, the top receivers, you know, being kicked off the team this year because of, you know, their different incidents or whatever have you. You can blame losing Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers, who are both doing really good things in the NFL right now. You blame whatever you want to. Georgia's still a program with a lot of talent, still a program that, especially with what's going on in Alabama, the gold standard, as they say, right, of college football right now with Kirby Smart. You got to figure out a way to, be more dominant on offense, for God's sakes. Now, everything I said about my Bulldogs, I want to say this. The defense, especially over the last few weeks, has looked really, really good. I mean, the defense has, to me, kept them in a lot of these games. And I think that's kind of the most important aspect of this. You know, you go back to the Texas game. They gave Texas all kinds of fits. I mean, I know they knocked Lagway out of the game, last week, but they didn't let that kid get back in that game either. I mean, they did what needed to be done, in my opinion, to win that game and to hold it out and to close it out and put Georgia in favorable situations when the offense couldn't produce. How that all applies to this week is, look, Ole Miss, they might be one of the most complete teams Georgia's going to have played up until this point. On the road, can they slow down Jackson Dart in this offense? We know they can put up points. I know on the flip side of it, the biggest matchup to me is going to be Ole Miss's defense against Georgia's offense. Both, I feel like at times, this year have flashed. Both at times this year have struggled and shown their own, inabilities at times. Chris, I want to kick it over to you. I want to hear a little more about Ole Miss.
Well put, Christian. Yeah, let's talk some Ole Miss Rebels here. As we know, and before I get into it, you're right about this ESPN matchup thing. Kind of ironic. Georgia's actually favored by 2.5 points currently on most betting websites. But Ole Miss 7-2, pretty good record so far this year. But we know what the two losses who they came to, right? Kentucky and LSU. This past weekend, boy, they looked elite on offense over Arkansas. They beat them 63-31. I believe, and somebody can correct me in the comments here on this game, It was one of the biggest wins or most points scored or something like that by an Ole Miss team in SEC play, something like that, or tied it, something along those lines. Jackson Dart obviously looked really well, as really, really good in that game as well. But let's throw some stats out there. Offensively, you talked about it, Christian. They're averaging 42.1 points per game. That's fourth best in the country. They're second in total offense, 45th in rushing offense. And they're number one in the country currently in passing offense with 377 yards per game. Now, I talked about Jackson Dart last week, 515 yards, 6 touchdowns. Those are Heisman-type numbers. But I will say this, on the flip side, you did struggle in the 2 games they lost, so both to LSU and Kentucky. Now, the running back, Henry Parrish Jr., having a solid season. He's averaging over 5 yards per carry. He's got 10 tutties on the year as well. And I think this receiver core doesn't get talked about near enough. I think Trey Harris is one of the more underrated wide receivers in the country. He's got almost 60 catches for over 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns this year. But Caden Lee, Jordan Watkins, Juice Wells, these guys are about as good as any trio in the country. So offensively, I don't have any questions with Ole Miss. They do protect the quarterback very well, as well. So defensively, though, this is kind of weird because we talk about Ole Miss, and I think the defense has improved. I do from years past under Lane Kiffin, Christian. Yes, they're giving up only 13.2 points per game. That's 6th best in the country. They're 22nd in total defense. They're 2nd in the nation against the run. They only allow 82 yards per game. But this is where it's weird. They're 91st in the country against passing yards allowed. So you could throw on these guys. But I think that's also because they blitz at an incredibly high rate. Right now, they're 4th in the nation in sacks. So, I mean, they can get to the quarterback here. And overall, in this game, look, we know Georgia has pretty much owned Ole Miss, honestly. I mean, you look at it, Kirby Smart is pretty much dominated Lane Kiffin the past couple of years. Last year, remember, I believe it was a night game. I think that thing was tied, 14-14 after the first quarter, and Georgia ended up running away with that football game. I do think that's going to be a little bit different this year, and I'll give you my prediction now. Like I said, I think this is going to be a tough game because of Georgia's inability or inconsistency on offense and defense, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And I do think Ole Miss has improved. But I've said this time and time again, Christian, with Lane Kiffin. He struggles to win against top 10 teams. I mean, you look at his track history, wherever he's been, he doesn't seem to win the big game. It's very comparable to James Franklin, to be honest with you, at Penn State. So I got Georgia 28, Ole Miss 24.
Yeah, Chris, I've got Georgia 31, Ole Miss 27. I mean, again, like you said, you touched on Lane Kiffin there. I think Kirby's been in a lot of these games. I mean, they know they can afford technically one more loss, but with Tennessee and I mean, even Georgia Tech still on the horizon there for you, got to have it, got to win it. On the road, this is where the season kind of comes to a head cross here for you. I mean, you look back at that game against Texas. They just played a few weeks ago, as it were, 3 weeks ago. They were able to kind of come out and shock the world. To me, this isn't a shock the world moment here, but it is a big spot that Georgia needs to rise to.